Okay, so now
I'm gonna put these on for y'all, and then
yeah, sure, great.
I'm not sure what the best way would be for this.
Do you want it like on your collar, maybe?
Do you
Do you think that it looks too?
Is that weird?
I mean, it looks fine. I think.
Kirstin, your water's on the left.
Okay. Is that good for you?
Is this fine? Okay.
Wait, left facing.
Yes.
So I'm.
You should walk out first.
Yes.
Okay.
I can do that.
All right, great. Is that okay for you in terms of side?
Yeah.
Sometimes people have a preference.
No, it's true. They have a good side. Andrea. Andy. You can also just say Andy if you want. Yeah. Go with that.
We're gonna get started. Hi everyone, thank you all for coming out here tonight. My name is Tiffany and I'm the Marketing and Event Coordinator here at Books Are Magic. We are so excited to have Andy Bartz and Kirstin Chen here with us tonight to celebrate the last Ferry out. But before we get started, I wanted to point out some logistics for how tonight's event is going to go. If you need to use the restroom at any point, the door is located right next to the Moleskine spinner on the right side of the room. We'll be doing hand-raised audience Q&A toward the end of the discussion, so start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them tight. After the talk tonight, Andy will be signing and personalizing books at the table next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to line up for that. If you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of The Last Ferry Out online using the link in the live stream description. Sorry. The Last Ferry Out. Now, everyone knows that I've been a huge fan of Andy for years. Her books never fail to deliver jaw-dropping twists, layered characters, and that delicious sense of dread that keeps you flying through the pages. The Last Ferry Out is no exception. It's a taut, thrilling ride that grips you from the first chapter and doesn't let go until the very last line. If you're looking for a story that's equal parts smart and suspenseful, utterly addictive, you're in for a treat. I'm not going to read you the description of the book because that's why you go buy it. Andy is a journalist and the New York Times bestselling author of Reese's Book Club, Pick, We Were Never Here, The Spare Room, The Last Night, and The Hurt. Her work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Marie Claire, Vogue, and many other outlets, and she's held editorial positions at Glamour, Psychology Today, and Self, among other publications. She lives in Brooklyn and the Hudson Valley. Kirstin Chen is the New York Times bestselling author of 3 novels. Her latest, Counterfeit, is a Reese Witherspoon Book Club pick, a Roxane Gay Book Club pick, and a New York Times Editor's Choice. Her next novel, Tech Wives, is forthcoming. You can pre-order that with us, too. So without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to these two.
Oh, this is for the live stream. Got it. Okay. A little bit before you start, or do you want to?
Oh,
Go ahead.
all right. We didn't actually discuss this in all of our time.
We were
what
just chatting.
Doing. We didn't have a plan. Thank you guys so much for being here. This is so exciting seeing all of your beautiful faces. I think I'm going to start with a very, very quick reading just of the prologue. It's like a page. And then Kirstin will take us to town. Blood hits limestone and splatters for a second before the rain beats it back, diluting it and sluicing it away in pink rivulets. Next, a raw scream pierces the air, but the storm waters it down too. A human cry is no match for the roar of rain on rock and the steady pulse of whitecaps beating against the cliff, of thunder rolling around the bay and palm fronds shivering in fear. There's no chance of anyone hearing it, but the scream isn't a cry for help. It's involuntary, a knee-jerk reaction to the way her skeleton now juts out of the arm that ensconced it moments ago. The bone is a riot of white, like a sharp bleached tooth, and where it pierces the skin, blood gushes freely. She managed to drag herself here through the frothing waves, but the base of the cliff isn't the oasis she hoped. 40 feet of sheer rock stretch overhead. Even if there were a clear path, there's no way she could scramble up with her forearm snapped in two. She's trapped in a bay with no hope of climbing out. Looking above her and then out at the roiling sea, she sees no sign of the people who are after her. No sign of a savior either, anyone to help her out of this mess. Her chest heaves harder and harder until her vision starts to blur. She presses her half-shredded palm against the rock and turns to rest her back on the limestone. She looks out at the storm, a tempest strobed and lightning strikes. The foamy water makes her think of a rabid dog. Blackness tugs at the corner of her vision, an undertow from every direction. I did my best, she thinks. I went down fighting. Then she closes her eyes and lets the darkness win. Thank you.
so great to hear that passage now that I've made it all the way to the end of the book, because I think it takes on so much meaning. So those of you who haven't read the book yet are in for a treat. And congratulations, Andy, on your 5th book.
Thank you.
Tiffany already gave such a beautiful description, but I just wanted to add that I think this book is really my ideal kind of summer read. Like, it's propulsive, it captivates you from the first page, but it's also really smart and really deep, and it asks really important questions. And that's the kind of summer read that I love. So you're launching out the summer season with a bang. But I wanted to start at the very beginning. The last Ferry is centered on a main character named Abby. She's a data scientist. And we catch her in a moment of crisis. She's lost her fiance, and she travels to this quiet, remote island in Mexico to kind of find closure and figure out what's going on. And that's when everything that she thought she knew about her fiance kind of gets slowly called into question. So can you tell us how this story came to be?
Yeah. So in the month of February 2020, before I knew what remarkably lucky timing that was, I spent a month traveling around Mexico by myself. And everywhere I went, I met these really wonderful, welcoming, friendly expats. And they, I was just part of their crew while I was there. I went salsa dancing with them. I did a beach bonfire with them. And then I'd move on. And what really struck me about these people was these communities were so tight knit, and these people were such close friends. And yet, if they lived in a country where everyone spoke English, I'm not sure they would ever hang out. Like, these were people that didn't have that much in common other than all speaking English and having sort of parachuted out of their own lives. And I was simultaneously jealous of them and a little judgmental. You guys just decided to leave the rat race and leave behind your family, your friends, everything you were born into. You're not integrating with the community necessarily. You're sort of your own little crew. And so, as is my way, I saw a really fascinating, close-knit, closed-door community, and I thought, what if we throw a dead body into the center of it? So that was sort of the genesis. And then I, started to dream up this island, and in deciding sort of who's going to be this person who what is the dead body in question, I decided it would be most interesting if there was a woman whose fiance had died on a solo trip there a few months earlier.
Right.
And now, 4 months later, our main character is coming to sort of get closure and, like you said, to say goodbye. And she almost thinks it's working for a little bit. And then it's not working.
Not at all. It's so interesting to hear that the genesis of this was in a solo trip, because I think one of the most striking things about the opening pages is that we see Abby, and she's hiking in this beautiful nature reserve, and she's like following the cliff. And then there's like a bird that startles her, and she drops her phone into the ocean. And this is like on page 1 or 2. And it I think I gasped, because I think if you're a solo traveler, that's maybe the logistically worst thing that can happen, is that you dropped your phone into the water. And so as a reader, I kind of gasped, but as a writer, I was kind of like, oh, this is like a bold move. You're really kind of putting you would say, like, the character's back is against the wall. Or as my writing prof would say when I was getting my MFA, she would say, hold your character's feet to the fire. Like, never you never give them the easy way out, because when you write yourself into a corner, that's when something, you have to get really, you have to stretch yourself to get him out of it. And that, when I saw that, I was like, oh, Andy is stretching herself. And so I'm curious, like, how that kind of little plot point came to you, and if that's something you consciously think about.
Yeah, that's a great question. The funny thing is, when I was doing a lot of my solo travels, I would not have local cell service. So I would only be using Wi-Fi anyway. So like, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. And then my lovely editor was the one who was like, she's screwed. Like, we need to, like, most people, this is their nightmare, and they would be really terrified by this. It's interesting. A journalist asked me yesterday or Friday, when was that? A journalist asked me, if I had done that in order to take away the internet, because the internet in a mystery can be so sort of problematic, because, if you Google things, then, like, there's your answers right there.
True.
And I pointed out that actually Abby's using the internet throughout. She gets a burner phone pretty quickly. She's on her laptop trying to figure stuff out. So I think it was more about how in that scene she's so lost in her own thoughts and just out of sorts that she loses her footing, and luckily she doesn't fall over a cliff, but her phone does.
Like, in a way, she's lucky that she only loses her phone. That's a good perspective.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the setting of this novel because it's set on this fictional island called Isla Colel. And I was surprised that you chose to fictionalize an island, especially given now that you've told us that you traveled all around Mexico and also that you have this background as a travel writer. And so I imagine you could have found a place that actually exists. And so what was the kind of thinking behind giving us a fictional island?
Yeah, well, I didn't want to take a real place. I don't know how nonfiction writers do it. I can't deal with reality too much. I need everything to be moldable to my specific needs. And I think I'd be frustrated if I was working with an island that was in a particular way. And I didn't want to slander the good name of any actual island with, murder vibes.
Yeah, that's true.
I feel like I'm always clarifying, like, the expats I met were not murdery at all. Like, nowhere I went felt dangerous. Like, people were lovely, locals were lovely, expats were lovely. But I thought, even though the trip came from me being on mainland Mexico originally, I thought an island was just interesting because it's this microcosm, right? It's shut off from the rest of the world. And shortly after I'd started writing, my partner and I went to Isla Obosh, which we were just there for a friend's birthday, but that was kind of inspiring too. It has a huge nature preserve. It has a bioluminescent bay. It has some stuff that I did end up using. But also it's this place where tourism is the engine of the economy, but also over-tourism is something they're kind of debating and is sort of an issue there and they're trying to deal with. And I thought that tension was really interesting as well. So I just sort of made up an island that fit my needs and could see it so clearly that I sort of demanded, I was like, can we have a map? I know it's not fantasy, but can we have a map? And then I got to hand draw what it looked like and work with a map maker, which was really cool.
Well, also because the geographical details are so sharp. Like, I just described this opening scene with the kind of coastal nature reserve and then the bioluminescent bay. And so you really had a whole island kind of mapped out in your mind.
Oh yeah, I literally could draw the whole thing,
right.
But no, none of it exists. A few people have been like, I went to Google Maps, I didn't see it. And I'm like, that's because it is fictional.
That seems so much harder than using, I think so, but what do I know? I've never made up an island. But a couple things that you said really struck me. One of them was that the island was really important to you because it's in many ways, it's a locked door mystery, right? Even though it takes place in this, it's an entire island. They're not locked in a room, but it does function like a locked room mystery. And the fact that the ferry comes kind of infrequently, and every time there's a storm, the ferry just doesn't run. And so I thought that was such a nice kind of fictional move to sort of make it an island, and also thematically it works with everything you're talking about. And then the point that you made about how all of these expats are tourists who see their role as protecting the island from over-touristed, from being over-touristed was such an interesting dynamic. It was one of my favorite parts of the book was the way that you explore this tension. And so in this group of expats, we have people who have been there for varying lengths of time. There's Pedro, who's Mexican, but he's not from the island, but he's more local than some of the other people. And then you have some people who've only been there for weeks. You have some people who plan to stay for months or even years. And there's this kind of hierarchy. And because I know that you're a travel writer, I am curious about the different things you were trying to explore and how you yourself think about being a responsible tourist and being an insider versus an outsider.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, something I noticed when I was spending time with these expats was that they would occasionally make little remarks about, over tourism or annoying tourists or, people on cruise ships or whatever. And I was like, I am a tourist.
Right.
You understand that I'm just passing through, unlike you. And there was almost this moral, superiority because they had moved there. And I thought there was such an interesting dynamic to this question of sort of who owns a place. And I didn't really firsthand witness tension between the locals and the expats, but I could imagine it was there. And especially, like you said, on an island that's sort of heightened, right? On a freestanding community like that. And And so in putting together this island, I mean, it's very small. There's only a few hundred people. We only meet a handful of them. I knew I wanted to explore, I wanted to hear from and understand not just expats, but also the locals and how they interacted. And I also decided to make one of the two narrators, Esther, who is the one who died before the book begins. We also hear from her in flashbacks. She is the child of immigrants. She's first generation, and her parents came over from Hungary, which my grandparents brought my mother over from Hungary when she was young. And my grandparents were very proud Americans, very, like the good kind of immigrants in their mind and as Americanized as possible. But there was just this interesting thing where nobody ever called them expats. They weren't expats. They were immigrants. And there's this really different attitude to how lucky they were to be here in America. And we worked so hard for you to have this life. And just that contrasted so sharply to me with like the expats who were like, yeah, I haven't worked in like 4 years. Like I like run this person's Airbnb just for money, but like it's everything's so cheap here. It's just such a different attitude. Which again made me judgmental, but then also why? Like why am I so devoted to the capitalistic rat race that I need to like stand for it? So yeah, I think in all of my books, I need some tension at the center that I am trying to explore by writing. And for me, the big question, and I don't know that I had an answer, but I definitely did explore it over the course of 300 pages, was, who owns a place and what does it mean to claim ownership of a place when you're not actually from there?
And what does it mean to be responsible as well, right? I like that you used the word parachute to describe these expats and how they're kind of parachuting onto this island. And one of the really great, I think early in the book, one of the expats, Rita, says to the narrator, says to our main character, she says, everybody here is running from something. Everybody here has secrets. And not only was that interesting to think about in terms of why expats become expats, but also for a murder mystery. What great backstory that everybody here is lying or hiding from something. And so very seamlessly in this book, you'll see that every expat the secrets of each of these expats kind of slowly come into focus, and every one of them becomes a suspect in some way because each of them is hiding from something. And I wondered whether you knew, I don't want to give anything away, that's why I'm being careful about it. There are so many smart twists in this book that are not only shocking, but also thematically resonant, which is my favorite kind of twist. And I wondered how you kind of mapped all of them out, whether you had an idea of the shape that this story was going to take place, and also if some of the twists surprised you even.
Yeah, the way that I write is just pure chaos. So I think all of them surprised me as well.
Really?
I had no idea. I knew all the expats had some kind of secret. Like you said, everyone's running away from something. Something has to propel you. You're either seeking or you're running away from, or both, right? And I didn't know what they were. So as I was meeting these characters, I was sort of, much like the two narrators, looking at these people and like, what are you? Like, what's going on beneath the happy surface or the perky surface or whatever you're showing us? And what also surprised me was that as I kept writing, I realized some of the locals on the island also had their own secrets and their own relationship with the island. And, an entire community is just filled with people with their own, every person's a universe and their own perspective they're bringing to everything going on there. So I wrote, this book ended up being sort of like a puzzle box structure, unlike my other ones. When I started it, I thought it was going to be one narrator, and it was going to be one timeline. We were going to start at the beginning, we were going to end at the end. And I was like, it's going to be 85,000 words, no problem. And you are laughing because you know how completely wrong that was.
There are a lot of timelines.
I mean, the incredible thing is that no one has called it confusing yet.
It isn't.
God.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's our main narrator, and then I realized we had to hear from the woman who had died. So we go back and we're hearing about her time on the island, and then I realized I really wanted to see Esther and Abby, the two women, together. So then we have relationship flashbacks that are in reverse chronological order in the end, even though I wrote them in a chaotic non-order. And then I also needed to bring more stories of the expats and locals to the page. And so
Yeah.
there's some kind of vignettes that almost function like little short stories at certain points from different people. And I wrote the whole thing with no plan and then made an outline after the fact. And then I color coded it so that everything was indicating like what timeline, what narrator, what are we doing? And then I could see all sorts of problems of like, oh my God, we have like 4 vignettes in a row. And then we go way too long before we have a flashback or this kind of thing.
Wow.
And I, broke it up into little parts and rearranged them. And somehow miraculously it all came together, which hopefully is like the experience for the reader too, of all the little pieces sliding into place.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I was going to say the flash, like the jumping around in timeline, I feel like one of the reasons it feels organic to the book is because this is a character in deep reflection. And so it makes so much sense that she would dip into the past. And a lot of the chapters in the past are her imagining her life with her fiance and things that happened leading up to the main timeline. And then also she's trying to recreate the story of what happened. And so again, that lends to kind of imagining the future, imagining the past. And so to me, it was incredibly seamless. And so well done.
Thank you.
I can't believe you actually kind of wrote it the hardest way possible.
Sure did. Every time. There's a hard way, I'll find it.
It really worked. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and ask about this like travel writer to thriller writer pipeline. So how did you move from travel writing? You've written 5 novels at this point in incredibly quick succession and to great acclaim. Can you talk about that path? And then also, was it always going to be thrillers? And is it always going to be thrillers?
A lot of great questions in there. Okay.
Sorry, I should have broken it down a bit.
So let's start with travel writing. So I was a magazine editor for many years and I kept getting laid off. And I was, because it's not a very terribly, strong, steady industry. So I moved to the much more stable world of book publishing. But yeah, in between, so I was in between gigs and thought I was going to get another job. And I was freelance writing and also just traveling a lot on my own because I loved doing it. And I had a friend who was an editor. It was the luckiest thing in the world. She was the lifestyle editor at Vogue. And that lifestyle is where they do their travel stuff. And she was like, well, why don't you write some travel stories for me? And guess what, guys? I can't recommend writing travel stories for Vogue nearly enough if you want to break into travel writing. Completely fell in my lap. Very lucky. And so I did some pieces for her and then kind of worked my way into the circuit from there of knowing other travel publicists and whatnot. And that was all at the same time that I was working on my first manuscript, which was a thriller. It ended up becoming The Lost Night. And there was really never a question of whether or not I would write another genre because it's my favorite one to read. And I feel like I try to write stories that I would love to read. I don't know if my next one that I'm working on now is sort of thriller / horror. Like there's definitely related commercial nearby hybrids that I am interested in doing. But I don't think I'll ever get rid of my dead bodies. Those aren't going anywhere.
And are all your books set abroad?
No. Let's see. The Herd and The Lost Night are in New York City. We Were Never Here is probably the closest kind of cousin to this one, and that starts in Chile. And then The Spare Room is set in a mansion in lockdown. That one's like a gothic. So that one is very much the opposite in terms of claustrophobia versus being somewhere wide out in the open. But it was fun to go back to like a nice sunny destination thriller when I was writing this in the winter.
So as I mentioned just a moment ago, you've published 5 novels in 6 years. Is that right? Or is it 6?
Yes,
I wrote it down,
5.
but the number is so unbelievable that I kept it. 5 books in 6 years. Yeah. And that is an incredible number of books. It's an incredible pace at which to write. And you just told us a little bit about your writing process. Can you talk about writing that many books and also sustaining a writing life?
Yeah. So my first 3 books were, I was on a book a year schedule. So that was sort of a mad rush. Like at any minute, I was promoting one, I was writing one, I was pitching one. I had like a lot of spinning plates. I'm now doing a book every other year, which feels very luxurious in comparison.
Yeah.
But what I always tell people when I've been getting a lot this week of like, oh my God, you're so prolific. You're
Yeah.
oh my God, how do you have another one? And I'm like, it's my job.
Yeah.
I have to write these books if I want to eat. I mean, I love doing it and I'm very happy to do it. But I'm like, if it were your job, I bet you would also find time to do it. But in terms of that writing life, I mean, I try to be disciplined about it. I try to treat it like a job when I'm in writing or revising mode, and have daily word count goals.
What is your daily word count goal?
Well, it depends how long I have to do the book, but for different books, it's ranged from like 500 words a day to like 1,000 words a day. And I usually work on weekends, so that's something different from those with a 9 to 5, because that's when no one's emailing me, so I can get a lot done. But yeah, I think also just having friends in the community, and like I really miss coworkers. I have worked from home for over 10 years now, so it can be tough, like not just being around other people as an extrovert and trying to do writing dates, trying to have check-ins with people, trying to sort of recreate some of those things that, believe it or not, I miss from being in an office. And yeah, just really trying to stay focused on the long game and thinking of it as a marathon and not a sprint. It can be, especially weeks like this one, it can get really easy to start to freak out of like everything comes down to this, and the reality is like, no, this is one of hopefully many books that I will do. And that's sort of liberating, and like I'm going to keep doing this. I keep telling myself like this is not the end. This is the beginning.
And you already have another book in the works, so it's literally not the end, right? And all of your books have had such incredible success as well. You've had New York Times bestsellers. You were a Reese's Book Club pick. You've had numerous film and TV options. And I'm curious about now, when you look back, like how do you think about writing success in writing?
That's a great question. Someone recently asked me, like, what would I tell myself from before my first book came out? And what I came up with was, you have to understand that there is no one thing that when it happens, like you will know you have made it. I, for some reason, had convinced myself that like, if I could just be a major book club pick, then I'll be set. And then it was like, if I could just be a New York Times bestseller, like then I'll know that I've made it, and then I'll never have to, really stress about it again. But the goalposts just keep moving, which can be depressing in a way. But once you can sort of recognize that and anticipate it and know it, it's actually liberating, because like I'm never going to suddenly feel like I reached the mountaintop, and that's okay. I can make peace with that. And I can just keep writing books that I care about and that I think are, that I feel proud of. And yeah, I think anyone in a creative field has to sort of come to terms with the fact that like whether or not you reach those external things is not actually going to change you as much as you would like. And wherever you go, there you are, etc.
Right. No, that makes so much sense. And also that like if you did reach the pinnacle, maybe you wouldn't keep writing, like if you did achieve everything that there was to achieve, yeah, that's really good advice. You talked about writing community and needing community as a writer because you're an extrovert and you no longer go to the office. And I wanted to ask about your Substack, Get It Right, which I think is just really wonderful in terms of demystifying the writing world. And it seems like you're always thinking about talking to people outside of the writing world, people who want to be writers. This is a Substack that has publishing and writing tips. Andy does interviews with other authors. What drove you to do that? It's it really feels like something that aspiring writers and emerging writers really need, but that not all established writers are willing to do.
Yeah, thank you. Well, definitely it was born out of what I saw as a need, because on social media, especially on Threads for some reason, I was just seeing so much bad publishing advice, like so many bad takes. I was like, don't do that. If anyone follows that advice,
and it's in a really adamant tone.
Yes, complete confidence that for things that were just terrible ideas. And also there was that, and then there was also kind of this like charlatan thing happening where people are out there claiming like, if you pay me, then I will get you a 6-figure book deal. I will make you set for life. I will make you a bestseller. And again, with that just complete confidence. And I was like, okay, I've been doing this for a long time. I started it last year. So at that point, I'd been doing it 5+ years. And I can't guarantee anyone anything because I am honest, but I can tell you, I can share everything that I have learned and what worked for me and my understanding of what's going on in this industry. And, as a former magazine editor, I think I just missed writing regularly and coming up with different kind of column ideas and regular things that I could do. And so I launched it just kind of to see what would happen. And I pretty quickly realized that the posts that people really responded to were the ones that I was least comfortable writing, the ones where I talked about feeling like a failure, the ones where I talked about how hard things were, the ones where I talked about, like, I know I should be grateful and I should, I shouldn't be letting on any of this, but here's the reality. Because I'm super grateful for my career, but as well as I, like, it's not a delight every single day. And there's parts of it that are really hard. And I think people just found that refreshing because when you can let your guard down, it lets other people let their guard down too. And for me, that's very much in line with my books, because something I'm consciously striving to do is to sort of bring into the light with these books emotions that women in particular are really not supposed to have, let alone share. Their anger, their shame, their fear, their vulnerability, their what's wrong with me. And so, yeah, I guess I got a little comfortable doing it in the books and now have turned to doing some of it on the Substack.
Did you feel, because you were a magazine editor, did you feel like you were outside the literary world, or did you have, because they are very related fields?
Yeah, as a magazine editor, I mean, I had a niche. I was like a health and psychology editor, so it was all very prescriptive. I was in women's service, we call it. So I was like giving people.
Is it really called that?
Women's service. Sure is. So I was doing service journalism about how to be happier and how to. Early in the career, it was like how to lose weight and how to look a certain way. So that stuff was fine for a while, but I kind of felt like I was in a unique position as somebody with a lot of experience now in trad publishing to be able to give advice in hopefully a clear and engaging way, since I had all that training in service journalism, and to be able to sort of marry that with what I had learned in this wild and sort of black boxy industry. It can really feel, I think, gate kept, and I'm very anti-gatekeeping.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you talked about that part of what this Substack gives you is that you have regular deadlines and also a place to put all your ideas. And so that made me wonder about the differences between writing a novel length work versus the kind of work that you did in your previous job, and whether it feels like different muscles or it felt like one trained you for another. How does one inform the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I definitely know how to produce even when I don't feel like producing. Like a surgeon doesn't get to wake up and be like, I just don't feel like doing
so tired
surgery today. That's not happening. Yeah. So in a similar way, like I could make myself sit down and write if I need to. And that was born out of having deadlines as a magazine editor and writer and journalist. But I think, part of the satisfaction that I'm getting from the Substack is like the quick hit nature of it. Like I can write something and have it be up that night, versus, I sold my next book and I think the deadline's like a year from now. So everyone's sort of like, see that in a year. And I'm like, all right, well, I will quietly go start writing and, be back later. So I think it's been nice having both and being able to get stuff up quickly without overthinking it, and then to also have the manuscript to wrestle with and love some days and hate other days.
How do you manage the kind of, because you go from promoting a book to kind of writing a book very quickly, how do you kind of switch on and off your external facing, your external brain versus the kind of introverted quality that's necessary for writing? And do you have tips for managing that? Because you're probably constantly kind of juggling the two, I imagine.
How do I do that? Badly. I do it badly. Well, I think maybe that's part of why I overshare, if anything, in the Substack and carry some of that same stuff into, Instagram and Reels and stuff of like, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly of actually being in publishing and being an author. But I don't have a good answer. I don't know. I guess I do some kind of time blocking. Like I try to do all of the writing. I use the Pomodoro method. So I'm like setting timers and I'm writing, and then I'm taking a break, and then I'm writing. And then another part of the day is sort of like everything else. And that's emails, and that's social media, and that's Substack, and that's preparing stuff. So yeah, I don't think I could really go back and forth from when I've like dipped into a writing period. But I do feel scattered, and like I get that feeling of
Well,
like, what am I
kind
doing
of
right now?
bad week. I shouldn't have asked the question this week when you're about to go on a big tour. And be like, how do you do it? So I understand. That sounds great. It sounds like you're good at it. Maybe that's why it isn't. You don't have a good answer for it.
I don't know. It's definitely a struggle, and if any author has figured it out, I would love to know what their strategy is, because I feel like it's something we all struggle with.
I mean, I think most people just don't write when they're when they're doing publicity. But
or in general,
yeah, most people just don't write. But most people, I think that you really kind of have to do one or I feel like I have to do one or the other, and so it's. But I'm not writing a book a year, so yeah, that's the reason I was very curious.
I do think my advice for people who have a new book coming out, especially if it's their debut, they're like, "What do I do? I'm so nervous. How do I not black out from panic?" on my publication day, and my advice is always work on your next project, even if it is only for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Because there is something about dropping into that creative process that, again, even if it's just for a few minutes, it sort of reminds your nervous system that this is not actually everything. There will be another book after this. There are more projects to come, and that's really soothing. So I think that is the only reason that I'm still pecking away at my other projects this week when there's not time. I shouldn't be.
Like it's almost like a kind of touchstone or like a grounding. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially because there's so much waiting time in publishing. Like if you weren't working on anything else, I mean, yeah, I agree. I need to pick up my notes because I wanted to ask you about reviews, and I had some quotes that I wanted to read. I got it. But I wanted to ask about your relationship to reviews. This book has had some really wonderful reviews. Booklist called it a, quote, first-rate thriller. Elle said that this book is, quote, the most unput-downable yet. So what is your relationship to reviews from critics and then also from readers?
Oh, well, you read some of the nice ones. They're not all like that. I have set the boundary that I do not look at Goodreads. I do not read Goodreads reviews. Goodreads is for readers. It's not for me. Because some of them can just be very mean, very judgmental, and I don't gain anything from it. I did ask a close friend to look at them for me right after the arcs kind of started going out, just to give me give me a general sense, give me a temperature check. And they didn't totally understand the assignment and were like reading me lines of like, oh my God, like, this person said this is so dumb. So we haven't tried that again since. But I mean, yeah, professional reviews I have generally asked my publicist, like, don't tell me if they're coming until they're really coming. And
that's smart.
I will see them when I see them. And that way I'm not like waking up that morning like, oh God, what is it going to say? And I try to really take in when somebody says something nice, because it's very easy to dismiss it and instead fixate on any shred of criticism within it. But yeah, I think it comes back to, at the end of the day, like, you need to feel confident in the product that you're putting out and know that it's not going to be for everyone. And especially, I feel like the stuff I write is not for everyone. I mean, it's queer, it's feminist, it's, as I said, it's talking about all this stuff that we don't like talking about. And then guess what? Some people don't like reading about and find that really uncomfortable. And so I know I'm doing something right if people don't like it. And I don't think my skin is getting thicker, but I think my recovery from getting tagged in the main review or whatever it is getting quicker, where I now can kind of remind myself, like, okay, I love this. Some very smart people that I know really love it. There were some other good reviews. And just, it's part of the process. And I think also the fact that I have 5 books now is like, oh, this is like 1/5 of my
Or
Wow, right? Like, it's not like this is the only thing, and therefore, like, a criticism of the book is a criticism of all of me.
right,
It's
right,
a little
yeah.
more diffused.
How many books did it take you to stop reading Goodreads?
I think 2.
Okay.
I think by the end of 2, I was like,
That's
no
2
more.
years. That's really good.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one last question. So I'm going to ask my last question, and then all of you can chime in with yours. But you mentioned that you read a lot of thrillers, and I was curious if you have any books that you think of as kind of touchstone books for this one that were particularly, I don't know, meaningful, influential, or even just that you read and resonated with you as you were working on this.
Oh, that's a great question that I haven't really thought about yet. So the book The Island, I hate that I'm like recommending a book by a white guy. That's not my MO. But the book The Island, like the base, Alex Garland, I think the basis for the Leo DiCaprio movie. I think I read it because my agent, after reading The Lost Night, my first book, said that something about it reminded her of The Island, where it's like this sort of freestanding community, right? This like close-knit, closed-door world that I keep talking about. And so I reread it back then, and it really stuck with me. And so I was recently wondering, like, did that sort of seed get planted 6 years ago? And I was bringing some of that back up with,
Interesting.
yeah, and bringing some of that back up with an island setting and with this sort of freestanding community. So that one comes to mind, but I mean, I'm always like aren't we all the thriller writers chasing the high of like a Gone Girl or like just a perfectly paced novel that Gone Girl was an interesting one because it like changed the game in terms of twists and
point of view,
and created this arms race with readers that like we're still doing our damn best.
You did pretty good in this one.
I have actually with this book gotten more I didn't see the ending coming than any other ones without complaints of it being out of nowhere. So I think maybe on some deeper level I am starting to develop that skill of surprising the reader by figuring out before them what their first 3 guesses are, and then I write the 4th. But yeah, I mean, Gillian Flynn really made all of our lives harder, and we love her for it.
On that note, if anybody has questions, please raise your hands, and I'll repeat the questions for the live stream. Yes.
Can you talk about the pitching process for this idea, and then how things shifted from when you first came up with the concept?
Okay, so the question is about the pitching process for this book and how things shifted after the pitch was accepted.
Yeah, this was an interesting one because my agent, who is a genius, wanted us to pitch this book while We Were Never Here was still on the New York Times bestseller list, which was a good move. So we pitched it a little bit earlier. Like we pitched it well before it was time for me to start writing it, because I was already into my next book by then, The Spare Room. And I faffed about for a while with bad ideas, and then finally kind of settled on this idea of an expat community. And I wrote a pitch, which recently I pulled up and I was like, oh my God, that has almost nothing in common with this book.
Really?
It's so different. Yeah, I had a main character who was like on this island because her husband was there for work doing research on something with plant life. And she just meets these expats, but has no particular reason to get to know them. As you can see, there wasn't actually enough there. So I pitched it. Everyone sort of reacted to the idea of an island and expats, and I got the green light, and then I put that aside for at least 6 months, a while. And then it was time to work on my next book, and I sort of like blew the dust off this idea and realized that there was no there. And faffed about some more, and then finally struck on this idea of like, okay, her partner has died there. She's going not necessarily to investigate, but she's going with a very particular purpose that quickly shifts when she begins to suspect that it was not the accident she believed. And so for the first time, I wrote like 20 or 30,000 words and sent those to my agent and editor for feedback on. Which normally I would just do a really short sample along with the pitch at the beginning, and then off I would go for a year. And it was good I did, because they were like, this is all great. The last page is where your book actually begins. Oh, okay, so I needed to write all that for me to understand it. And then the book began on the last page of the sample.
Did you kind of keep that beginning in some way?
Did I keep? I think most of it, it's sort of referenced because it's like part of the world, part of the backstory. But I started the story much later, and it was like I needed to write that to understand where everyone was coming from. But it didn't actually need to be in the book, which I do this for every book. I always write like 5 chapters that we lop
Then you
off.
then caught it. Okay.
So I know that you've worked on an adaptation of at least your last book. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Okay, so the question is, can you talk about the process of adapting your own book for film or TV?
Yeah. Writing for the screen, it turns out, is really hard and really different. No one told me. Yeah, I really wanted to like learn how to do it. I wanted the new skill of it. And I was very lucky with, and this has to stay within this room, guys, but I was very lucky
And
to
the live stream.
find it in the live stream. Yeah, to find a producer for the spare room who was willing to let me take a crack at
Amazing.
writing a draft. And so I worked with those producers on a bunch of rounds of treatments, and then read a ton of scripts, and then sat down and started writing. And it is satisfying in a certain way because the formatting means that the pages add up really quickly. So I was like, look at me go! I wrote like 10 pages today. This is amazing. But yeah, it felt like I was getting my MFA in screenwriting by writing the screenplay, which I think is familiar to all of us writers because you get your MFA in fiction by writing your first manuscript usually, even in addition to an actual MFA. But I think I've taken a lot of lessons from screenwriting and now I'm putting them into my books with like, the ideas of show, don't tell, and like what's the latest I can enter a scene and the soonest I can leave it and still have it make sense, and how can every scene do multiple things. What am I doing that's just filler? So I think it's been good to force myself to do that kind of distilled writing, and I think it'll be reflected in my future books. Thank you for that question.
Piggybacking off of that, with the journalism background and then now doing being a novelist, I'm curious how your journalism training shows up when you're writing fiction, and then maybe even with screenwriting as well.
So how does your journalism training show up in your fiction writing and then also in your screenwriting?
I think the biggest way, and I think I mentioned this before, is just being able to produce whether I feel like it or not, and just get words on a page and not overthink it. I learned how to write quickly and I learned how to write cleanly. So even though sometimes what I've put on the page is god awful, most of the time, like what I'm writing is at least the general direction that I'm trying to go. I think something else I learned from journalism was just about like starting with a bang, using the fewest words possible to evoke everything you're trying to evoke. And that's not necessarily in word count. I'm still a pretty flowery writer, but like what is filler, what actually doesn't need to be here. And so now that you're saying that, I imagine my journalism background did help with the screenwriting too, in terms of like that economy of words, and everything kind of working hard. But I think as a journalist, you learn to think with a reader in mind. Like we would define, okay, at Self Magazine, our reader, we have a name for her. Do you remember it? Yeah, it was like Jennifer. Yeah, it was like our girl. Yeah, you're right. We referred to our girl a lot. And she was a certain age and she did this and that. And we just knew everything about our little composite. And I'm not trying to write for the market. I'm not trying to guess where things are going to be 2 to 3 years from now. Right. But I do think it's helpful to remember, like, I'm trying to reach someone with this. I am trying to like say something to someone. Is the way that I'm writing it too esoteric? Is the way that I'm writing it accessible? Is this going to be read the way that I intend for it to be? Yeah.
I was a merchandiser at Banana Republic, and we also had our girl. How specific do you get with your audience? When you're thinking of, like, do you have an ideal reader in your head?
I don't have an our girl. I don't think. But I do think I especially now more so than earlier in my career, I catch myself when I'm being too myself, when I'm being too New York City, when I'm not thinking about, because the people who buy books, a lot of them, especially thrillers, a lot of them are like women in the Midwest whose lives are very different from
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah.
Maybe I should just say like Central America, whose lives are very different from mine. And so it's like, I want to be intentional. When am I writing about a very different life to theirs because it's escapist and because it's entertaining and it's like by design? And when am I just alienating people?
Mhm.
And I do try to sort of, have it still feel accessible, hopefully.
Right.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
My question is, now you have 5 thrillers and you're constantly in a state of generating anxiety for the characters that you study. Have you had to create barriers or processes to get yourself out of that mindset, or is there bleed over that you've had to kind of manage, and if so, how?
Yeah, interesting question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so because you've written 5 books and they're all these really tense thrillers where you're in a state of generating anxiety for your characters, do you have to turn that off when you're not working? And do you have ways of moving from one space to another?
Yeah, thank you. What an interesting question. I think I would be a little anxious hamster whether I was in this field or not. I think part of the reason that I am a thriller writer is that like my brain is just constantly going to the worst case scenario, and I am imagining I'm the one that, you're doing something very neutral with your friends, and I very creepily am like, wouldn't it be weird if X, Y, and Z happened and things just got really scary? Everyone's like, what is wrong with you? So I think my brain would be doing that no matter what. And I've always loved like scary movies. As you know, we talk about scary movies and scary books. And when I was little, I was into R.L. Stein and Lois Duncan and all that stuff. And so if anything, I think I'm fairly desensitized. Like when friends tell me that my books are like the only scary books they read, I'm like, this is scary. Like I hope it's engaging. But I recently watched with my partner The Haunting of Hill House, the excellent TV show, Mike Flanagan, and she hadn't seen it before. And there would be parts where like she was next to me so tense and so ready to, and I was like, oh, this is how other people experience horror movies.
Yeah.
I can finish it and just like go to bed, no problem.
Oh, so you have the exact temperament to do this
So
work.
I guess so. Like, I don't know if I'm desensitized or if this is just how I'll always be, but I think for me, the harder thing is connecting with the emotionality of a character when it's stuff like the grief they're going through, the reflection they're trying to do. Like, that's what I have to really like take a few seconds, like, ground myself wherever I'm sitting and like really try to drop in to do that. But no, the scary stuff, like I write that just as easily as I would write a scene and like, they're having tea.
I also feel like because you are the god of the world and you know exactly what's going to happen, it feels different from reading it. Like
That's probably true.
I can't read scary stuff, but I actually find writing scary stuff easier than reading it, because when you're reading it, somebody you're at the mercy of whoever has created the work.
It's true, but then sometimes you're like, how is she going to get out of this? And then you're like, oh shit, how is she going to? I have to get her out of this.
Yeah, that's
wish
true.
you
A
get
different
out
kind
of
of
this.
anxiety. That's true.
That's true.
That's true.
I have a question about a few questions ago. You mentioned that the pitch that you sold for this book ended up being quite different the final book, is quite different from the pitch you sold. I'm curious how much of that was you realizing a few months later that, okay, this isn't quite what I want to tell? How much is it your editor, your agent? Or is it just the time passing that helped you figure, like, how did you figure that, basically?
So the question is, given that Andy was talking about how the pitch and the final book are quite different, how much of that was driven by your editor and your agent? How much of it was just time passing? How did you figure out what the book needed to be?
It was really that I sat down. Thank you for that question. I sat down to start working on it, and I was like, oh, this doesn't work at all. It suddenly became clear to me that like there wasn't enough drive, and I could kind of feel it. I think on some level I could feel it in my gut when I had first turned it in, but it was sort of like, that's a problem for tomorrow, Andy. And then the chickens came home to roost. And so I think I was the one who went back to my agent and editor and was like, I'm changing things a little bit. And like, bless them, we have always had a relationship where I think my agent said to me early on, like, Hillary is not buying this because of small detail that you're worried about changing. Like, like, we want this book. She wants a book that works. We both want a book that works. And so I was sort of given this trust of like, show us that it's going to work, and then you don't need to like petition for a change before I actually like write it and turn it in. And so, yeah, it was me realizing what I had there was not thought through enough, and yeah, just rejiggering things so that they worked, and then presenting it to them. And they were both kind of like, I see why you wanted us to read this. This is a little bit different. But all was for the best. Everyone could kind of see by then that the story worked better with more drive and
right. And it is quite common that pitches change, I think, because like, you know, I don't know how many pages you gave, but when I sold a pitch, I gave them a page and a half. So there was only so much that you could write in that page and a half, and then you turn in a 200, 300 page book. Is there one last question before we wrap up?
So you mentioned a couple times that you're very disciplined about being able to sit down even if you're not, necessarily feeling it. Being able to kind of generate that kind of momentum, I wonder what role that plays in your writing process.
So Andy is very disciplined, as she already mentioned, and yet she's able to generate an incredible amount of momentum. So how do you do that?
I can't not, because there's these deadlines in my contract, and so it's. I mean, I think I've always been good about having like the long-term goals and not, the experiment with the kid and the marshmallows. Like if I know that 8 months from now, like there's going to be a book that's due, I have no choice but to really like work hard now and to keep chipping away at it.
But you could kind of, I mean, like you're on an every other year now, right? Like you've changed the deadline kind of. So it's not just the deadline that's helping, right?
Well,
I think you're like selling yourself short.
Okay. But even though, I have 2 years till it comes out, it's still like this next book is going to be due, I think, for the first time in April. But because I don't have an outline, my first draft is an absolute mess. And so if I start working backwards from like, okay, this is when I need to get it to beta readers. I need this much time after a beta reader reads it for me to rejigger everything.
Yeah.
Before that, I need to take this mess of a first draft and turn it into something I can show to a beta reader without being completely embarrassed.
Yeah.
So I have to backdate by so many months that in the end, I think for this one, I have like 5 months to write it, I think. Which isn't that long to write 100,000 words.
Not at all.
And it just gets, I don't know, the anxiety of like watching the days pile up that I haven't done it is so much worse than just forcing myself to sit down and set a timer. And the other thing, I guess this is related to your question too, but those 20 minutes, I'll set the 20-minute timer. Obviously alerts are off, phones in the other room. But sometimes the first like 3 to 5 are just me in a separate document being like, this is terrible. I don't know what to do. I'm never going to figure out this book. This is stupid. This scene doesn't make any sense. I don't know what anyone's doing next. And I have my little tantrum, but like my fingers are moving. And there's something about like your fingers moving into a document that at a certain point your brain switches over and I can go back to the
I love it. It's
actual
muscle
document.
memory. It's like playing scales before, like warming up your fingers.
Yeah,
I love it.
just a little warm-up.
That's great concrete advice. Thank you. Thank you all for your questions, and thank you,
so
Andy, for
much.
this wonderful book.
Thank you everyone for coming. Andy will be signing books where my coworker is pointing back there. I want to encourage folks in the live stream to buy a copy of the book. We do have extra copies of all of Andy's books up front, as well as Kirstin's. Buy it for your friends. Buy it for Memorial Day. Take it with you. And we just ask that you grab all your belongings because we do turn the store back into a store right away. Thank you.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to sitting or should we stand?
Whatever you guys are more comfortable with.
Okay.
Maybe standing, yeah.
We're in the live stream.
Oh, yeah.